Okay, thank y'all for coming in here today. This is a presentation that was created for Dr. Edwards in EFD 620. And we are going to be talking about linking classroom assessment with student learning. And just like we do for our kids, we have a learning outcome for this little meeting today. And you guys are going to be able to explain how classroom assessments improve student learning and our instruction. That's our learning outcome. But before we start, we're going to take a little pre-assessment. So if you will go to Kahoot, I'm going to give you a Kahoot code, and if you will put that code in, it should take you to this test, and you should be able to answer the questions on your devices, and then it should give me the results. We're going to look at those results after we get done and see if you were... Oh, Destiny is in.
I have to do a nickname?
You can just put your last name in there. It should work. I'm still spinning.
There, right?
Shira.
Shira. Apparently, I'm not going to get to play.
If yours won't load, you can just share with
here.
Okay. You can share with Shira.
Here I am.
All right. So everybody's in? Okay, here we go. 6 questions. Are you ready? The first one, they're true-false. True-false questions. Good assessments have the purpose of the test clearly in mind. True or false? Everybody choose your answer. You gotta think 60 seconds to choose.
I'm in second place.
Okay.
I didn't know what I was doing.
You figured it out now?
Got it, girl.
Okay, here we go to the next question. I turned the volume down so it won't blow us away. Your scoreboard. I didn't do it for points, so we're not keeping up with points. All right, question 2. It is not important to determine what type of assessment would be most appropriate. Oh, we're quick.
I'm still in second place.
Oh, you're trying to see who can answer it the fastest?
But it tells me 4th place every time.
Well, probably because yours is taking longer to load.
Probably.
You should never use a question on inconsequential details just to trick students. That's like those questions that throw things in there that don't really matter just to try to throw them off. Y'all are such smart teachers. It does not matter how clear the directions are for a test. Who won that time?
No.
Mary said she won.
It says first place for me. And we're tied.
Okay, this should be the last question, so it's your last chance to win.
No, it says 4 of 6. Yeah.
Okay, maybe. Oh, yeah, this is 5. We got 2 more. Assessments are beneficial to the instructor. True or false?
Do it first.
Quick fingers. Okay, this should be the last question. Time should not be considered when preparing an assessment. Good job. So these are some of the categories that we're going to be talking about, but it looks like Mary was the quickest. Everybody got all the answers, but Mary apparently has quick fingers because she got them in.
You're not even on that.
They didn't even give you 4th place. All right, so as y'all can put your devices down.
Okay. You're smoking hot and you should score.
That's okay. All right, so we're going to go through these different categories and look at just assessments in general and then how we use them and how they affect our kids and us. So the first slide, and I know the lighting in here is a little off, but it says assessments can help teachers. One way is to identify student strengths and weaknesses. Another way is to monitor student learning and progress. And then the last key point was it helps us to plan and conduct our instruction. So if y'all will take just a second, since there's 4 of y'all can just do partners. And I want you to talk to each other about how you see these play out in our classrooms in first grade at this school. I know with upper grade levels it's sometimes a little bit different. But just talk to each other about how you see all of this working.
I agree with all of those.
Agree? Informal, formal classroom assessments, which are things that we do all day, every day. And you can see on here it says that is the bond that holds teaching and learning together, and that font's really small, sorry about that. It allows educators to monitor teaching effectiveness and student learning. It can motivate and shape learning and instruction. It can help teachers to gauge student mastery and the required skills. It can help teachers determine whether students are prepared for the tests that are used for high-stakes decisions, such as like placement for testing, stuff like that. And it can also help students improve their own performance. This was something that I just wanted everybody to think about for a second. It says classroom assessments do more than measure learning. What we assess, how we assess, and how we communicate the results send a clear message to students about what is worth learning, how it should be learned, and how well we expect them to perform. So does anybody have anything that they agree, disagree? Do you think that the kids pick up on what we think is important, what we don't, based on, sometimes I think we give them stuff, and especially as they get older, they say things like, are we going to have a test on it? Like, they know what we value and what we don't. They know the difference between busy work and something that they really need to pay attention to, because they know they're going to be assessed on it. Okay, assessments provide us with good evidence, and that evidence helps us to improve our instruction. So these are just some things that we need to keep in our minds. We need to know our learning goals and keep those in mind when we're creating and coming up with assessments. And we do a good job of that by making sure that our learning goals are on our lesson plans, so that we can kind of keep that in the forefront of our mind the whole week before they even take the assessment. We need to consider the different assessment strategies, such as fill in the blank, multiple choice, short answer questions, things like that. We also need to determine what's going to constitute the evidence that they've reached their learning goals. What product are we going to have at the end that's going to let us know either yes, they've mastered it, or no, they haven't. When we're developing and using classroom assessments, these are 3 questions that we should ask ourselves. The first one is, what am I trying to find out about my students' learning, and what learning goals or outcomes do I want to measure? And again, we do that with our lesson plans. And also, most all of our assessments have the standards on the assessment, so you know exactly what you're testing for or measuring with that particular assessment. The second question is, what kind of evidence do I need to show my students have achieved the goals that I'm trying to measure? And then last, what kind of assessments are going to give me that evidence? So if you're just wanting recall information, you may give them like a multiple choice or fill in the blank type thing. But if you're wanting them to be able to apply something, you might expect them to write a little bit more, maybe a short answer type thing, or even a verbal assessment, just so that you know they understand the information, but doesn't necessarily have to be written down. And I think we do a lot of that with our unit testing when we pull them back individually. It's not all written down by them. Some of it's just what they are able to do for us and explain to us. Assessments must be accurate and appropriate. Assessments must provide the evidence that it was meant to provide. So make sure that whatever you set out for that assessment to show you, that's what you got in return. Assessments must measure the knowledge, skills, and/or abilities the teacher believes are important. You don't want to put things on there that don't matter. You want to make sure that you're testing them on things that are important. If the goal is to test for retention of facts, then factual tests such as multiple choice or fill-in-the-blank assessments may be the best choice. And a lot of times, especially in primary grades, that's what we go to because, for one, they're just learning how to take tests, so it makes it a little bit simpler for them. And then measuring conceptual understanding or ability to perform tasks usually requires more complex forms of assessments, such as performance assessments, and we actually do some of those with our end of the 9 weeks test that we do when we have them come back and work with us individually. Our informal day-to-day testing or assessments and measure of student progress, and we know especially in first grade this is something we do all the time, the observation and questioning strategies. A lot of what we do is just looking at the kids when they're in center, seeing when they understand, when they don't, and then questioning them to find out what they understand. And then traditional paper pencil tests like the multiple choice and the short answer that we test on at the end of the week, just to give them an opportunity to individually show us what they can put down on paper. There are more elaborate forms of assessment, and some of these we can do in early primary grades, but they're not as, or not used as frequently, I guess. Essays, speeches, demonstrations, and then problem-solving activities. But in the upper elementary grades, even in like 4th and 5th grade, with PBL and a lot of the things that they incorporate, it incorporates public speaking and writing and those problem-solving activities. So even though it might not really be applicable for us in first grade, it's still used at an elementary level. The assessment methods that a teacher chooses depends on the following. And the first one is the nature of the information that's being taught, the purpose of the instruction, and then what the instructor wants to learn from that particular assessment. We don't need to forget our students. Research shows that helping students understand what's expected of them and why gives students an opportunity to become active participants in their own education, and it also helps them to take responsibility for their own learning and judge of the quality of their work. I know when I taught 4th grade, we used a ton of rubrics, and so the students would get the rubric before an assignment, and they knew exactly what the criteria was, what they had to do to get all of their points. And as students get older, I think rubrics are important for them to kind of, they know what they're going to get before they turn something in, because they can check off whether or not they have done what the project required based on the rubric. Students benefit when they understand their learning goals, when they know what kinds of assessments are going to be used to evaluate the achievement of those goals, and then when they understand what criteria is going to be used to evaluate their work and what the ideal response is supposed to look like. And so a lot of times we give them examples of, this is what a good sentence looks like, this is what I would expect for you to write if I asked you this. So modeling and giving them good examples of what we expect from them in return. Guidelines to a good assessment: we need to be fair, we need to let students excel, and don't assume that students understand the instructions. To be valid, assignments must give all students an equal chance to show what they know and what they can do. And students should only measure, assessments should only measure the knowledge and skills that are related to the objectives. To give our students a chance to excel, we need to let them demonstrate their best performance. To do that, the task needs to be something that's going to be engaging for them, that is accessible to everyone, and that permits the student to demonstrate what they know or what they can do. And we don't need to assume that students understand the instructions. Unclear directions can confuse the test taker, can affect their responses, and can lead to inaccurate information about what students actually know and can do. And I think we see this all the time when it says underline and they circle, or when they just don't understand the instructions or don't take the time to listen when we're going over them. So I think that's why we repeat ourselves over and over and over, so that they get a clear understanding of what we're expecting from them. These are some suggestions for improving classroom assessments. And this is mainly talking about if you create an assessment on your own, which I know a lot of times we get our assessments from the board. But if we were to create an assessment, we need to review it before we give it. And they suggest waiting at least a day after you write it. Give yourself time to, I guess, process and make sure you've thought about every part of it. Ask a colleague to review it. And then during that review, check to see that the directions are clear, that the questions represent the skills that were emphasized during instruction, and that knowledge and skills that were not covered in class are not being unintentionally evaluated. The type of assessment used is compatible with the method of instruction used in the classroom and the skill that's being measured. And the assessment will contribute to us as instructors in understanding what the students know and what they can do, and that the assessment is fair and all instances of bias have been eliminated. These were the references for what was used to create this presentation. And so before y'all leave today, I want you to just take a second and write down what your biggest takeaway was, what you think maybe you saw in yourself in some of your assessments that you need to think about more or change, and what we need to do moving forward.